Money is one of the most powerful forces in our world. It touches every area of our lives and it shapes decisions, it drives markets, and it often reveals our deepest values. But behind the glitter of wealth and investing, there is a dark side to this. It's a story about power, control, and the subtle ways that money ultimately shapes our souls. And today I am super excited to be joined by a dear friend, Matt Cole. He's the CEO of Strive Funds, with the intent to hopefully peel back the curtain of what's really happening in the financial world. We're going to talk about how investors, what they see, how the market reflects our character, and why Christians can't afford to ignore this really important issue of where our dollars are going. My name is DiBella, and this is Clarity in Controversy. Matt, welcome to the conversation.
Tanner, it's good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. Matt and I have a pretty extensive history together. A number of years back, I had been teaching a class with some colleagues in Sacramento, and we had invited Matt and his wife to come speak at one of those sessions. And, I think I'm a pretty well-informed person, pretty educated, but I was shocked at what I heard in that conversation. It was very compelling, and it was a lot of things that I was hearing for the first time. And so I felt like, man, we got to get this conversation on the podcast. And Matt, you have a pretty extensive pedigree in terms of experience in the world of finance. And so before we kind of get into the dark side of money, I kind of want to just give the audience some context of who you are and why you're such an important voice in this space. Can you just tell us what you do and kind of how you found yourself in this space?
Yeah, so currently I'm the chairman and CEO of Strive, which is a publicly traded asset management firm. We're a Bitcoin treasury firm, but probably more importantly for this conversation, we're an asset manager that got its teeth in pushing back against a lot of the ESG and DEI movement towards financial freedom.
Mm.
But where I came to know Tanner at Destiny Christian Church around the time of COVID, I was actually a portfolio manager at CalPERS in Sacramento, California. I was managing a $70 billion portfolio of fixed income securities and saw firsthand many troubling things, which is how Tanner and I got to know each other and kind of the nexus of the conversation that my wife and I had at Destiny several years ago around fiduciary duty breaches of taking the money of everyday citizens. And so for, Destiny Christian Church, a lot of members there might work for the state of California, have their pensions tied to CalPERS, and then CalPERS was using their retirement funds to push social and political agendas that they would disagree with, that harmed Christians specifically, and ultimately also cost them money. And so it's one thing if I could say something might stand against Christian values but makes them money. We could have a debate against that, and I think I know where Christians might fall, but at least there's an intelligent debate. But if you're both losing money and you're going against the values of your people, then that was super troubling. And so we wanted to help inform people about this problem and then ultimately not just complain about it, but provide a solution.
Yeah. Well, you kind of mentioned it, but was there a moment where your eyes kind of opened up to the dark side of money and the markets? What was that moment, that story where you became aware yourself of someone that's very enmeshed in this world of, man, there's a dark underbelly to this thing that not many people know about?
Yeah, it was probably around 2017. And so prior to that, you would see my former employer make leftist social or political statements, but it felt like a lot of bark with no bite was my perception of, okay, they're talking about pushing these agendas into corporations, but I wasn't actually seeing the corporations, at least what we saw kind of from 2017 through call it 2022, actually make really troubling claims. And then around 2017, you started to see a lot of the large asset managers, whether it was BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard or Invesco, make troubling statements of how they were going to push an agenda into corporate America. And then you also saw the corporations themselves, so CEOs of large publicly traded companies make statements in support of initiatives like DEI or making claims to support, call it the LGBTQ movement, but also at the same time talk negatively or not say anything about supporting Christianity. And so, as an example, at CalPERS, you could literally wear an LGBTQ shirt, but if you had a Bible or if you said Merry Christmas, it was a problem. And so that clear double standard became very obvious to me that it was putting a literal tarp on a flame of allowing Christianity to flourish. And so my view for corporations is that Christianity can flourish if you just remove the tarp. You don't need a corporation to promote Christianity. If you just don't make it so that a Christian can't say they're a Christian, wish people Merry Christmas, say those simple things, then that is enough. That story to be able to have freedom of speech will allow a movement to happen. And I think at this point, we are having a movement back towards Christianity in this nation. I'm seeing it very clearly post the assassination of Charlie Kirk, but that was what we were pushing back against is freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Yeah, I want to get into some of the ideological frameworks of what we're talking about. Before we do that, I want to hear from you on the full breadth of like what we're talking about. BlackRock is a great example. When we're talking about how they are using dollars of everyday Americans to invest, but also realizing the control and the power that some of these large companies hold. Can you talk to me about like just give me full picture of what that looks like, what that means, and ultimately what are the implications for everyday Americans that are investing in companies like this?
Yeah, so it's important to know that today, because of the rise of the index fund, so whether it's through 401k, through ETFs, through mutual funds, that the largest owner, when I say owner, I mean beneficial owner of almost every publicly traded company is the handful of BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And so if you were to pull up the ownership percentages, they will show up as the largest owner. Now, obviously, they do not directly own those shares. It's actually the everyday American, the people that are investing in their 401k, the people that are investing in their ETF. But those people actually own the ETF. And BlackRock itself is the owner of the actual companies. And so that's the backdrop is that and it's kind of an interesting thing that in a capitalistic society that competing companies have the same largest owners. That's just a weird thing, right? And then the next question is, well, what does it mean? What is the power of being the largest shareholder of every company? And so it's important to note that as a shareholder, you have both a vote and a voice in the future direction of a company. And so you can vote on the board of directors, you can set goals, you can approve pay packages. And so you ultimately have a lot of ability to pressure a company to move in certain directions. Otherwise, there could be consequences. Board members losing their jobs, CEOs losing their jobs, pay packages not being approved. Basically, the owners of the company, so BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, can constrain companies if they're not seeing things that they liked. And so typically you would think of that as a good thing, that you want accountability, right? Accountability is a good thing, that if a company is not performing, there are consequences. But there's a problem when BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they don't actually have the incentives to care necessarily of how the stock price performs. What they want to see is their asset base grow. So they want to see more investors invest with them, right? That's how they make money. They charge a fee on their products. And so it's important to note that their largest customers tend to be blue state pensions like CalPERS or the New York pension funds. And so if those are their largest customers, then they're going to listen to their customers. And so that caused companies like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to listen to places like CalPERS and start pushing leftist political agendas into corporations to try to win the business of the CalPERS, of the New York pension funds, and ultimately become, the sounding board for those leftist political agendas. That's where you saw the rise of ESG, the rise of DEI, and how you saw it actually become infiltrated into corporate America is because you had the exact same owners of every single company.
Wow. So going a little deeper here, you know, and I'm not an expert on this, so if I use the wrong terminology, please correct me. But when someone owns securities, my understanding they have voting privileges, I have a Roth IRA, I have brokerage accounts, and I get emails all the time asking me to vote on certain decisions. I would assume the vast majority of Americans are not participating in that privilege. Can you walk us through what that means and why, when we don't engage in things like that, why it could be detrimental to things like what you're mentioning now?
Yeah, so I'm going to use the analogy of just general elections that people participate in general politics. If you don't vote, then obviously your voice will not be heard and someone else's will, and that will drastically impact the future direction of your country, of your state, of your city, of your school board, whatever it might be that we're talking about. And so you've obviously done a great job of driving the vote in politics and civics issues and making a statement, which I firmly believe that the church needs to be active in giving a voice and a perspective, a biblical perspective of how to think about these issues. But what has gotten lost at times, not through you and your work, but in broader America, is that you also have a vote and a voice in the future directions of corporations. So when we talk about woke corporations or corporations adopting social political issues, you do have a vote and a voice. And so some people might own direct ownership positions in companies like Apple or Nike or Amazon, whatever that might be. And if you own the direct stock, then you yourself can vote for yes or no for various directions for the company every year during their proxy season. And so that's what you're talking about when you see these proxy statements get sent to you. The reality is this, that when it comes to corporations, most what they call retail investors, and so you and me as an individual or people listening to this as an individual, be a retail investor, they get these ballots. And on average, about 1 in 4 at most actually vote. So 75% are not voting, and that they're also, while a large percentage, a minority of the ownership position of the companies. And so they own a minority and they don't show up. So effectively, they don't matter. Their voices aren't heard. And so then what does matter is the institutional investors, the BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards, and now the Strive, which is an up and coming institution, actually voting kind of in favor of fiduciary duty. But those are the people that vote basically 100% of the time, and so their vote gets amplified because if retail doesn't vote, then the ones that do vote get amplified voice. Just like how in politics, if you don't show up to vote, then people that may not have your values, their voices get amplified. So we need to both drive the vote if you own stocks, but also let the large asset manager, or even how you think about which asset managers you invest in, let them know what you care about. And I think we have seen that in a major way over the last couple of years.
So, as the market currently stands, do you think that the stock market securities reflect America's character, or is it shaping our character as you currently see it?
It has definitely been shaping our character for the last couple of years. It's been showing us, as an example, name your large publicly traded company that has made statements in support of issues that as a Christian you might disagree with, find repulsive, actually now harm shareholder value. I do think we're seeing today a shift, and I don't think it's a principled shift from these corporations, and I can kind of get into a little bit of the reasons why, but a shift kind of away from some of that stuff. And the reason is that you've seen several instances of corporations kind of bending the knee to different, I'll just call them woke issues, and then actually having them directly harm shareholder value. You've seen several red states implement actual penalties for corporations or asset managers. You've seen several lawsuits. You've seen the Supreme Court actually rule that hiring on the basis of race or sex with regards to college admissions is actually illegal. And so if it's illegal for college admissions, it's probably also illegal for corporations. And so you've seen a movement back. But that movement is what I'll call just moving with the wind. And so, if Donald Trump is president and putting pressure on, then they're probably going to move back this way. And then if the next president is a Democrat, they'll move back the other way. And what we need is principled leaders in principled leaders in corporations and in the asset managers to say, here's my foundation. This is my foundational belief, and that foundation is firm. And I'll tell you what we heard from corporations in 2022 and 2023 when Strive was founded. the most common response we would hear when we would say, "Hey, we think you're violating fiduciary duty. We think you're harming shareholder value." They would say, "Behind closed doors, we agree with you, but we could never say those things publicly. We would be canceled. The asset managers would be at our feet." And so they didn't use the term bend the knee, but it's like, we kind of have to just say this as window dressing, even though we don't actually believe it. And so it became very clear to me that this was a fringe minority in America that really believed in a lot of these issues that we're pushing back against, but that we have a culture of people, and I think it's the love of money is actually what I think it is, the love of money to secure your job or your career, to not stand against things that you believe in. And so people that are behind closed doors, probably more aligned with what we would say, but are not strong leaders. And so we need a movement back to truth, strong leadership. And with that, we can actually defeat what I think is a movement that's actually a house of cards that looks bigger than it actually is.
So, what would you say to those that would make the claim, Matt, I agree with what you're saying, I understand, but principled investing is just not profitable?
Yeah, so what I would say is that for Strive, like, we are not a Christian organization. I am a Christian, and my in my personal capacity, I am pushing, I would say, Christian activism even, right? That's my personal life. At Strive, the whole point is that corporations should be mission focused, that Nike should not be supporting LGBTQ issues. It also does not need to be directly supporting Christianity. It can just stay out of it. They can sell sneakers. And if you're just selling sneakers, then people on both sides can wear Nike. It actually can be a place for citizens of this country to come together with differences. And that's actually a great place for, Christians to push a Christian message, like at a sporting event or something like that, is because it in and of itself is staying apolitical. And if you stay apolitical, I think Michael Jordan had a famous quote that Republicans buy sneakers too, right? Like, there's no need for a large publicly traded company to alienate 50% of the customer base. There's obviously a need for small corporations that might be aligned with different social and political issues, including Christianity. I mean, you can build a great for-profit business by providing a great product and a great service for Christians, as an example, or name your social issue. But fiduciary duty at the highest level for Americans should be staying out of that in our view. And if you stay out of that, my belief is, as a Christian, Christianity will flourish because it's not being constrained by leaders in this country.
So, there's this issue, I've heard you mention this phrase before, I've used it many times in my lectures, is this idea of Christians voting with their wallet. And that can have application in not just investing, but where we shop, how we shop. But in the context of this discussion, people that are listening to this, watching this, they've got 401ks, retirement funds. What's the call? Like, what is the response? Because many people that are going to be engaging with this conversation are people that have money in corporations and institutions like BlackRock. And so, how can they shift? What does that shift look like? How can they vote with their wallet? What is the response for us as Christians that are listening to this? What's the clarion call for you?
Yeah, so the call would be this. I do not believe that BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, any of the large asset managers are a good fiduciary for your assets. And I think that there's two ways that you can go as a Christian. One would be the Strive route, which is to say corporations should stay out of politics, they should stay out of social issues, and leave that to everyday Americans and push corporations to be mission focused around their mission. If that's your answer, then Strive is a great product. The other would be, I actually want to take a biblical approach, even if it costs me money with regards to investing. And there you can look for actual Christian asset managers. But I would say that you have to be very careful with them. It's tough because, and it's not because what they're doing is bad or anything like that, but if you look across corporate America, there's not large publicly traded companies that hold, in my view, great Christian values. And so what you'll see sometimes with some of these Christian ETFs is they say they take a biblically responsible approach to investing, and then you look at their holdings and so you might see something like Nike is their largest holding, and you say, well, how is Nike represented biblical investing? And the reason is that it's very hard to pick and choose publicly traded companies that have actually held to Christian values. And so our belief is that we want to stay in the world. We want to stay invested with a vote and a voice in every company, even the ones we disagree with, because if we were to take the ones we actually agreed with, we think there would be almost nothing left.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's this nuance between we want to make principled decisions, but we can't isolate as well. It's this dichotomy, this tension. Talk to me a little bit before we let you go on Strive and how people can specifically engage with your institution.
Mhm. So primarily for most people, we're an asset manager. We have 13 different ETFs, so equity ETFs, fixed income ETFs, and people could invest in those in their retirement accounts. We are also a publicly traded company focused on a Bitcoin mission. And this kind of gets to the root that I know is not the focus of conversation today, but what we really stand for is financial freedom. And so financial freedom is in our asset management business, how we approach corporations, but it's also around the concept of true and real money, which we think actually the US dollar and other fiat currencies have actually failed the tests
Mm,
of a true money. And that Bitcoin is actually an interesting way to pull back freedom with regards to how you think about saving and think about money. But that's a conversation maybe for next time.
yeah. Well, Matt, I appreciate it. You are a wealth of knowledge. The way we handle money is not just about finance. Matt did a beautiful job talking about this. It is about faith, right? Every dollar that we invest, that we spend, or that we save is ultimately a reflection of what you and I as Christians believe and who we trust. And as Matt reminds us, money can either be a tool that magnifies God's purposes, or it can become a trap for you and I that shapes us in ways that we never intended. And so the choice is ours. Will we be mastered by money, or will we master it under the lordship of Christ? I want to thank you for listening to Clarity and Controversy. If today's episode challenged you or gave you something to think about, I would encourage you, share it with a friend, continue the conversation, respond to it. To watch full episodes and more, you can go to theamericancouncil.com, or you can text Clarity to 96341. My name is Tanner DiBella, and this is Clarity in Controversy.